The content is based on a couple of things. One is a course I teach called How to Interview a System Administrator, which is you're the person doing the hiring, what questions do you ask? This is from the other side of the table. This is hopefully somebody who's taken that class is asking you the questions. It's also based on a Guru's In session that Tom Linchelli and I did in November at WISA last year. And also, unfortunately, based on the last 11 months of my life, which is trying to find a job since my last startup failed. What I will tell you is anyone here unemployed at the moment? Okay. I don't know if you're seeing this here, but the one encouraging thing I will, or is anyone here actively looking to try and get out of where they are? Okay. What I will tell you is that, at least from what I can see up in the Boston area, it's getting better. I've been seeing an increase in sysadmin job postings for about the last 4 months. And in about the last month or so, I've been seeing more developer jobs as well.
I can say the same thing. My headhunter contacted me and said the market's really open up in Philadelphia. And it's this whole kind of
it actually is starting to get better. It's not going to be great. It's still going to take a while, but it's getting better. Standard thing, no death by PowerPoint. I think I have even fewer slides to project on this one than the other one. What's the purpose of the course? Help you get a job or increase your chances of it. Agenda happens to have 6 items as well. I really didn't plan for the book to be 6 and 6. This one's going to be a bit more even. I got about 5 minutes on each of them. And again, ask questions as we go, and I will probably take up about the exact 45 minutes. As before, there are no hard and fast rules. Some things work one way, some things work another. You go and interview on Wall Street, it's going to be very different than if you interview at a biotech company or hospital. And if you go interview at a startup, you may go dressed like I am right now and just go and lunch with the people and they say, yeah, why don't you come to work for us? Oops. Okay. So recruiters or networking? Networking as in your own personal group of friends. There are 2 goals here. The first goal is to get past HR. HR doesn't hire you, the managers hire you. And that's the second goal, to get to the hiring manager. If you are relatively new in the field, if you don't have a lot of experience, if you don't know a lot of people, recruiters may do a better job of that. Good recruiters don't talk to HR, or if they do talk to HR, they talk to HR and the hiring manager. They send the resume to the hiring manager and copy it to HR so HR gets it, but they have a relationship with the hiring manager. When I've been a hiring manager, I've actually had a couple of recruiters that I've worked with that it was rare for me to call them up and say, hey, I need a person to do such and such. But in general, when they called me, their calls came directly to me. They said, are you looking for this? What are you looking for? When I said this, they were pretty good about calling me with candidates that were reasonable. There are a lot of recruiters who aren't good. But again, if you're starting out, if you don't know a lot of people, if you've been isolated, recruiters may be a better way to go. On the other hand, I've been in this field for 30-odd years. I've worked at a lot of places. I've gone to a lot of conferences, been involved in a lot of things. I'm willing to bet that my personal network of contacts is bigger than almost any recruiter you're going to find. And so in general, I don't work with recruiters, but most of the people are going to be somewhere in between. Somewhere in between the two. You need to decide what's working better for you now. If you do both, you need to be really, really careful. The way that I deal with recruiters is a little bit different than the way more junior people are going to get to deal with it. Part of the reason for that is I'm at both an age and stage of my life and a stage in my career where I'm willing to say to a recruiter, I don't want to work with you, even if it means I don't get a particular job that may be out there because it's not worth it to me. I have enough resources, I have a wife who works, I have my own resource for getting a job that I can afford to turn down some jobs if working with the recruiter is really going to be a pain. And so when I talk to a recruiter, I can say to them, look, I need you to agree in writing to the following couple of things or we don't work together. And the one thing that I absolutely will not bend on is if I'm working with a recruiter, the recruiter must clear every contact with me before going to the customer. Because the worst thing is if you send your resume to a company and the recruiter sends it to the company. Some companies, it just automatically, the recruiter gets the cut whether you got in there or not. Some companies, to avoid the problem, will simply throw your resume out. They won't take it from you, they won't take it from the recruiter. They just say, possible conflict, not touching it, done. So, and the good recruiters don't have any problem with that because they're going to be talking to you about, is this a job you want? Is this, does this sound like a good fit? And you can say, okay, at that point, reveal to me just the name of the company, and in return, I agree that if they tell me the name of the company, I don't turn around and go after that company, right? But if you're dealing with recruiters and you're sending out your resume on your own, you need to have a guaranteed positive locking mechanism to ensure that your resume does not show up at the same place that they sent it. I've had some really bad experiences with recruiters. I haven't dealt with them recently, but talking to people, I haven't dealt with a lot of them recently. Talking to people who have dealt with them and talking to the few recruiters that I have been dealing with recently, they seem to have gotten better. And I suspect that most of the problems I had were during the sort of upswing into the tech boom in the 90s, and people were getting into the business who had no business being recruiters. They sounded like used car salesmen. Stereotypical movie bad used car salesmen who were as unethical people as I've ever run into. So I admit I'm biased. The people these days seem to be much better because they're the people who have managed to last through all this. Resume format. I know it's wrong. Word, PDF, HTML, text. Yeah. Recruiters won't work. Recruiter says, okay, blah, blah, we're going to work together, fine. Send me your resume in Word. Part of the reason is that if you've never worked with a recruiter, what you don't know is they take your resume, they cut off your contact information, they print your resume on their letterhead with their contact information. And that's actually to protect you as well as them, right? That way the customer calls them, goes through them. Sometimes you can talk to them in taking HTML. Because one of the things you can point out is, you can just suck the HTML into Word and do it that way. And they go, oh, okay, I can do that. Recruiters are not going to take PDF because it's impossible for them to modify your resume. The last thing that you want is for the recruiter to be retyping your resume. If you don't give it to them in a form that they can cut and paste, I guarantee that they will make mistakes in it. By the way, I don't think I covered this anywhere. Your resume, even more so than your cover letter, really represents you when the manager first sees you. And a minor typo here may not kill you, but it's not going to look good. The closer to perfect your resume is, it's not going to help you get the job, but the less it will hurt you, right? If I get a resume that's got errors left, right, and center, where the formatting is lousy, where the dates are wrong, where the cities are stuff that's just not there, in general, I'm going to reject the person based purely on the resume, because the theory being, if they can't even present themselves well in a piece of paper that they had unlimited time to prepare, then how good a job are they going to do when they get in here and things are under pressure? So you really want to take a lot of time and work on your resume, get all the errors out of it, and if you give it to a recruiter, give it to them a form they can cut and paste, and then ask them for a copy of it. Just proofread it, just to be sure. Question?
I've interviewed co-ops, some over the last year and a half, and I can't echo what you're saying enough. I find that especially true in terms of systems administration. If they're going to do it, if they have typos on their resume, what are they going to do wrong in code or on command lines if they can't,
Yep.
typo on the resume?
Yeah. If you think about it, it's the equivalent of showing up for an interview wearing a shirt with a stain on it, right? A large, obvious stain. In a situation where you could have prevented it. First impressions really do matter. And this is another one where we're talking about people, not technology. So, if you give your resume to the recruiter, give it to them in a form they can deal with easily, If you give them text, it tends to lose all the formatting, and it just increases the chances they're going to get it wrong.
Comment that I would make is, if you do use Word, don't do section headings by saying font 14 bold. Use a section heading called section, so that when they slurp it into their database, your job pieces are job pieces, not just bold lines.
Okay, I don't know anything about Word, so I can't help on that.
Use a template.
Yeah. Web portals, question?
I'm also going to put out that don't count on Microsoft spell check.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I got hurt big time on the
Yeah.
interview because of that.
Especially for system admin, I mean, half the things we type aren't in the dictionary.
Also, have somebody else proofread your resume. It's really easy to miss typos in your own stuff. Every time I go back and read something I've written before, I find typos.
Well, I lost
Read it
mine.
out loud to yourself too, if you actually speak the words.
That helps, but a second set of eyes really matters.
I think that helps me too.
I lost the job because it made it through me, and through Microsoft, it made it through my recruiter, the hiring manager, the hiring director, and the CIO that I was interviewing with questioned me on.
Yeah, happens. Fortunately, these days, web portals, if you're applying for a job through a web portal, most of them will understand all four of these formats. There are some that don't like PDF, and only the more recent ones understand HTML, especially if it's HTML tables. But I've had a couple of situations recently where I've had direct contact to the hiring manager, often by phone or something. It's like, okay, yeah, we'll get the process started. Go use the web portal and put your resume in through that way, because that's just how they do everything. It may or may not bypass HR correctly, and I'll tell you a funny story about that in a second. But I keep my resume in HTML, and I'll show you a copy of sort of it later. And recently, it's been working just fine, which is really nice. I was talking to the manager. He said, okay, great, we had a phone screen interview. He said, all right, let me get started on setting up the interviews. And less than 24 hours later, I get mail from the HR person saying, the hiring manager has reviewed your resume and decided not to, we decided we're not interested. What? So I sent mail to the hiring manager. It's like, did something happen? Or is this a typo? And he goes, oh, they weren't supposed to send you that. So just because you've talked to the manager doesn't mean that HR knows that. And if you have something like that, get back in touch with the manager and say, was this a goof? Or, yeah, so your question.
In interviewing people or making resumes, I hate resumes that are more than one page. And so I tend to go towards PDF so that it stays the way I formatted it as one page.
Well, so here's the thing. HR probably wants the resumes in Word, and they probably want them to print because they wind up storing them. Most managers don't really care as long as they can read it easily, and if the manager prints it and the page and the formatting isn't, the page breaks aren't correct, in general, the managers, at least technical managers, usually don't care. PDF gives you the most control. On the other hand, sometimes getting it all right in a format that works is just tedious. I'm sorry, I lost what you said. I'll think of it.
The one page thing.
Yeah, the one-page thing. The problem is that if you're relatively new in the industry, or you've been doing pretty much the same thing for a long time, squeezing it on the one page or maybe a second page is okay. No matter how hard I try, I cannot squeeze 30 plus years into less than 3.5 pages.
Do you need to though? See, here's the thing.
No,
You don't need to put every single job you've ever
No.
had, especially
I'll show you
your 30 years ago, your COBOL program.
No,
yeah.
that's my compressed form. If I do the typical, here's the job, here's what I did, here's the job, here's what I did, it's like 11 pages long.
Right, but do you even need to have? Can you compress it even more? Could you
No.
do the last 10 years of jobs, 15 years of jobs, and say?
You'll see when I show you the examples. It's not done by job. It's done by areas I've worked in, and in order to represent all the areas because they're all relevant to what I'm interviewing for.
Mm-hmm.
If I drop the one area I don't care about anymore, it drops down to just under 3 pages. But the other thing is, if you're somebody that has that much experience, or you do that much consulting or whatever it is, managers aren't going to care that your resume is really long. Part of the trick is getting the important stuff up front, and ideally up front at the end, because those are the pages they'll read for sure.
That's not true actually. There's a too long didn't read for whether you're a manager or not.
Oh yeah.
As someone who has
Sorry.
read stacks of them.
I'm not talking about 11-page resumes. I'm talking about 3 or 4 page.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. If you
Even
were,
3 or 4 pages is a lot though.
Yeah.
Especially when you're in an interview and you're trying to look and you're like, okay, where was that thing of experience that I read? I prefer to have, up to 2 pages. It can be, one sheet, 1 page, maybe 2 pages of, because otherwise it's too much to keep in mind, and I'm trying to focus on what do you know.
I think that depends on the layout of the resume.
I think also too, the other thing, the longer your resume, the longer somebody reads it, the higher the BS factor.
Again, that sort of depends on how you build your resume and what you put in it. Obviously, it's a balancing thing, right? On one hand, you want to be as concise as possible so that they spend as little time reading as possible and get what they need out of it enough to decide whether they want to bring you in for an interview or not, or call you up. On the other hand, you need to accurately represent what your skills are and what you can do for them in hopes of hitting the things that they care about. So how you do it exactly is going to depend on you, on the format of your resume you choose, on what your career's been. I mean, I know some people who've been in the business for, almost as long as I have and have worked 3 jobs. Right? Squeezing their resume onto a page or a page and a half is really simple.
But it shouldn't be, because if you've worked X number of years, are you doing more than somebody else just because you've been at different companies?
Well, that's the thing. People who have done nothing but consulting, at some point. Now, I also keep two versions of my resume. One is the shortest form possible, and the other one, which invariably they still want to see, is something that includes my full job history, even though it's just a listing of title, company, and dates. And even that runs over 2 pages. But again, I've worked for an awful lot of little startups who've gone out of business and consulting. So,
I'm sure, is it that the resume is too long and they don't read it, or is that the resume is too short and where's all the information? You can't have both
Well,
ways.
that's what that's the thing. You don't have to, yeah.
I want to move on.
We'll see examples.
Yeah. Layout of your resume. There are 2 versions of sort of my resume. I don't remember which is which, but one of them is the typical, here was my title, here was my company, these dates, I did blah, 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 blah. And for a lot of people, that blah, 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 blah is the same for the first job and pretty much the same for the second and the third and the fourth. And after my resume crossed a certain point, what I decided to do is the other one, which I think is resume 2, which is, here is a short paragraph of what I've done as a system administrator. Here is a second short paragraph of what I've done as a developer. Here's a paragraph of what I've done in system network architecture, and here's a 4th one for what I've done in technical training. And I condense 30 years of experience, which is often repeated. How many times can you say, I designed designed and debugged and implemented a software installation program, right? You only need to say it once. So I've got 30 years of experience in a particular area condensed into a short paragraph, which is as condensed as I can make it. Well, as condensed I feel like I can. And then I have another section later on, which is, in those 30 years of experience, here are the interesting projects I've worked on. And again, 1 to 2 line descriptions with no repetition at all. Because this is, hey, I did this cool thing where I, machine control for this, or this really cool software installed. And I get a lot of comments on my resume, oh wow, really interesting format. But in general, people seem to perceive it reasonably well. It conveys what I need in a reasonably condensed form, given that I've been in the business a long time and I've worked for a lot of companies. It works for some people, it doesn't work for others. They're simply there as examples. But the one thing I will say is, if you're doing here's the job, here's the stuff I did, here's the next job, here's the stuff I did, and you've got more than a page of that, think real hard about reformatting it. Especially if it's duplicated, because people really don't want to read the same thing over and over and over again. Really quickly, this is one of those, just when you go to write your resume, pull up the slide and make sure all of those things are on it. The only thing that I question is whether you put memberships. Do you put that you're an IEEE member? Do you put that you're a LOPSA member? Do you whatever? I don't. In some fields you might, particularly if you're in a field where the membership in the professional organization is sort of a requirement for the field. In our field, I don't really feel like it adds anything. I don't think it hurts, but for me, the reason I leave it off is my resume is pretty long anyway, so I don't need to add it. The extras. The most important extra I think that you can add is publications. If you've written a magazine article, a referee journal, books, anything like that, put that on the resume, because people seem to care about that. They look at it and go, oh wow, that's interesting, tell me more about that. Or, oh, if this guy's writing a book about stuff, maybe he really does know what he's doing. Otherwise, just, check those off. The buzzwords, the operating systems and stuff, at the very top, as plain as possible. Don't bother with version numbers. If you use Linux, put Linux. If the distributions of Linux really matter, you might list the one or two that matter, or what you could do is Linux, and then in parentheses, including whatever distribution the job ad mentions. So if they're looking for somebody who does Red Hat Enterprise, say Linux, including Arhel, 3 point whatever it is, or Solaris 10. I tend to customize my resume a little bit. And so I don't list version numbers of things unless the job ad specifically calls for them. Again, short, sweet. If they see Solaris, that's probably all they're really looking for. Keep them up at the top, keep them simple, list only the ones that are important. I don't remember if I've gotten around to doing it, but I probably should drop COBOL from my list of languages. It's just not relevant anymore. Cover letters. My general rule is not to bother. If I'm talking to somebody, I get my name into someone, and they say, send me your resume, I will send a 1-paragraph header in the email and attach my resume as HTML or whatever, which is, thanks for talking to me, I look forward to talking again, blah, blah, let me know if you have any other questions in my resume. I don't think that cover letters help that much. On the other hand, I tend to tailor my resume for different positions. If I'm interviewed, back when I used to interview for both sysadmin and development positions, if sysadmin was the job I was going for, I'd take the sysadmin paragraph and move it up to the top. And I might rearrange the order of the projects that I've worked on. If I'm going for a development job and I know they're looking for someone to develop installers, I'll move all my installer experience up to the top, put the development paragraph at the top. I think that matters more than cover letters. That's not to say a cover letter is necessarily bad, but I just don't think they matter as much as they used to. On the other hand, if you have a really good cover letter and you're like, sure, why not? How do you get to an interview, or how do you get them to give you an interview or a phone screen? The various cartoons that say, this, that, and the other, blah, blah, magic happens here. This is the section of the talk where magic happens. The only hard tip that I can give you is make yourself as available as possible for them to interview. It used to be, it's like, you want to be a little bit coy about saying you're available for an interview and stuff like that. Look, everybody knows the market's out there. Everybody knows people are looking for jobs. Everyone knows people are out of work. And if somebody says, hey, when can you do a phone screen? My answer usually is, pick a time, I'll be available. They know I'm not working, right? It's not a big deal. That's the only hard and fast rule that I can tell you that will help you. The reason is, everything else is dependent on the mood of the person reading your resume that day, whether it really does go to the hiring manager or to someone else in the group, whether the words that you used on your resume are the same words that the hiring manager would use to describe your problem. Right? Some people have really good Google food. They put in some stuff into Google and they get the answer to their question. And other days, you type for hours, it seems, and you can't find a relevant web page. It's not because it's not, in general, it's not because it's not out there, it's because they're using different words than you are. And somebody thinks about the job in a different way, than how you describe it on your resume, and even though you might be a perfect fit for the job, they don't see that on the resume. Or maybe they're just swamped with resume and yours was towards the bottom of the pile. By the end of the day, they're like, yeah, right, resume, tired of it. There really isn't anything, the only thing that you can do is hope that your skills match what they need, hope that your resume expresses it in a way they understand, and hope that they're in the mood to read your resume and bring you in for an interview. This is why, remember way back when I said one of the goals is getting to the hiring manager? Anything that you can do to bypass whatever the normal process is. Even if it's as simple as have somebody in the group hand your resume to the hiring manager and say, hey, there's this guy I know. You know, he's looking for a job, why don't we consider him? Most likely the manager's going to put it on the top of the pile, or he's going to put a little note on it that says, yeah, that's the one Tom said I should look at. And maybe that helps you. But anything you can do to get to the hiring manager in some way other than just your resume is going to help you get a phone screen or help you get an interview. Other than that, there's always so much you can do. You know, you can affect your resume, you can affect how you perform in the interview. Getting them to give you the interview is really just out of your hands, and you sort of have to throw your hands up and go, I tried. A bunch of stuff about interviewing, and I apologize for not having an agenda on this one. Before the interview, there are a bunch of things that you need to do, which again go to the making a good first impression. Know who to ask for. You show up at the front desk, the person at the front desk is not going to know who you are, is probably not going to know you're expecting. And if you get there and say, yeah, hi, I'm here for a 1 o'clock interview, and you don't know who's interviewing you or who you're supposed to ask for, you're doomed. The person at the front desk is going to call HR. Maybe HR knows, maybe HR doesn't. A lot of companies, on first interviews, the manager just has people come in for a one-on-one chat with 1 or 2 people, and HR may never be involved. Know who to ask for. Make absolutely sure you know how to get there. Right? The last thing you want to do is call somebody 2 minutes before the interview and say, I'm lost. Right? If necessary, drive there the day before. Or when you're negotiating with the person about when you're coming in, say to them, is there anything I need to know about getting to your building? The last company I worked was in Maine, Massachusetts, in this building where I could see the parking lot out my window, but for somebody to find their way from the parking lot to my building was effectively impossible. And what we would tell people is, call us when you get out of your car and we will talk you into the building. And we would just tell them that at an interview. It's like, don't try and find us, you won't do it. Call them and say, yeah, I can see you walking across the parking lot, go in the, no, go in the other door. Just ask them about things like that. Is there something? Where can I park? Is there parking in particular? If you're not going to like a campus thing where there's parking lots and all, ask them where to park. You get it, somebody says, oh, you know, come on down to, you know, Tremont Street in Boston. Where are you going to park down there? Well, hopefully you're going to take the T, but ask those kinds of questions. And the other thing is, make sure you get there on time. If necessary, go early and sit in your car and read a book, or sit down on a park bench and read a book, or whatever it is. Do not be late. And if you go and sit in your car and read a book, set an alarm. Right, last thing you want to do. Get there in time to go to the bathroom before you get to the client or the employer or whatever it is. Now, in some cases that may not work out so well because the bathroom may be behind their security barrier, in which case, do it before you have the receptionist call to tell your manager you're there. Walk in and say, hi, I'm here for an interview in about 10 minutes. Could you tell me where the bathroom is first? Now, sometimes it may not work. They may need to escort you. But, again, just get that stuff out of the way before you go. Take copies of your resume with you. Sometimes it will be because the person just forgets to bring it with them. Sometimes, unfortunately, companies aren't real good, and they will say to people, you, go interview this guy at 1:30. And it's 1:25 now, and they don't give the person your resume. Also, if you're dealing with recruiters, and again, this is less true now, but way back when, I'm sorry, what time is this session? 3 o'clock, right? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I would take my own copy of my resume just in case the recruiter screwed up what they gave me. And, I could say, here's this one. Take a pen, take something to write on other than your resume. You want to take notes, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You're not going to remember everything. Interviews are pressure situations. Do everything you can to make it easier on yourself. Write down, things you want to ask them. Write down what they say. Write down stuff. Write down the names of the people you talk to, so that when you're talking, sorry?
Give cards, business cards.
If you can, I'll talk about that, but, and that's something I talk about in my interviewing class. When, if you meet person number 3 and they said, so, I was talking to Jane, and you go, who? It's like, and it was the person you just talked to? Bad, just bad. When you get there, be prepared to fill out an application. Sometimes they will tell you, look, we'll have you show up at 2 o'clock, you'll fill out an application, the interview will start at 2:15. Sometimes they won't tell you that and they'll budget for it. Other times they'll hand you a 4-page application and expect you to fill it out in 0 time because the interview is starting in a minute. What can you do? How many people? Yeah.
I was trying to once bring my work history the day before I had one where the application said include all your previous jobs, do not leave any days unaccounted for.
Right. Hopefully it's on your resume, but yeah. We're all sysadmins. We are all aware of privacy and things like that. How many people still have any concern about the privacy of their social security number? Okay, we haven't all given up. They're going to ask you for it on the application. My way of dealing with that usually is to put will be provided, and if they ask about it, I say, when you get to the point where you're ready to actually make me an offer and do background checks and stuff like that, hire me, I happily give you my social security number. Until then, you don't need it. You can also cross out the permission at the bottom of the resume for background checks and credit checks and all that, and again, say, if we get that far in the process, I'll give you permission to do one, but until then, I'd rather not. You can't cross out the bit that lets them ask questions to verify the validity of your resume or to call companies to ask about your salary. There is a risk in doing this, that from the beginning, you are labeling yourself as a potential problem employee. In some cases, they won't care. If the manager is sympathetic or understands it, they'll just, go, yeah. In other cases, it may cause problems. If you're questioned about it, as politely as possible, simply say that I'm concerned about the security of it, I'm concerned about how easy it is for people to steal it for credit card fraud, etc. I'd really prefer to give you that information when we need it. It's a risk you take. And I will tell you that as much as I often don't provide that right away, there are jobs that I want enough that I just fill out what's on the application, hope for the best, and do anything I can not to get noticed in that way. On the other hand, they may turn around and say, look, don't give us the information, we don't proceed with the interview. End of story. And you get to choose. My general rule about that is, if they really want it that much and they're going to insist on it, it's probably not the kind of company I want to work for. But it may be the kind of company you want to work for, and you may need to deal with it right now. Very few companies will ever do a background check or credit check until they get to the point of wanting to make you an offer. But again, if you read the fine print at the bottom, in some cases you've given them permission to do that, even if they don't hire you. The other thing is be prepared to sign an NDA. There is something out on the web, if you ask Google for cult of the NDA, in quotes, you will find a very interesting article by somebody who deals with the stuff at a level that basically says 99% of the time they are ridiculous in a job interview situation. You just don't need them, and they're not needed for a lot of other reasons. There's usually no reason for it, or often it's a very simple one that you can just say, can you cross out a bunch of this stuff? As a matter of habit, I will say to people, hey, managing NDAs and stuff is a little tricky. Do we need this for the interview? And sometimes the company will say, nah, we can go without it. If they say, no, we have to have it signed, then again, you get to decide, do you want to interview with the company or not? I had at least one company that I did not go to work for because of the back and forth about the NDA. It became so obvious to me that they were so focused on keeping what they did secret when, as it turns out, there's really no reason. I mean, everyone knows what they're doing anyway, but I just said, this isn't really good. Be prepared for them to ask for your references. It's okay to say to them, I need to ask my references if it's okay for them to call you, for you to call them, can I send them to you by email? And typically, that's fine. I always do that. You don't need to. I mean, you ask somebody, will you be a reference? That should be good for up to about a year. As a matter of course, I ask every one of my references every time they're about to be called, if for no other reason than it gives them a heads up that they're about to be called. And so I just say to the employers, look, if we're at that stage, I need to get permission, double check the permission with my references. Can I send them to you? And nobody's ever batted an eye. Yeah, that's fine. On the other hand, if your references say, yeah, I know you're job hunting, just go ahead and give them my name, give it to them. Save the time. During the interview, the most important thing I will tell you is it is a two-way process. Right? They're trying to find out if you're the right person for the job. You're trying to find out if it's the right job for you. Switching jobs in this economy is not great. It can hurt your resume in some ways if you have a job that you only lasted 3 months at. And the one case where I have something in recent memory in my job where I was there for about 4 months, people say, so what happened here? And my answer is, unfortunately, that I did a really lousy job of interviewing the company. Had I asked the right questions, I would have run like hell. Because it was a startup who expected a minimum of 60 hours a week, plus 2 weekends a month, and a few other things. And that's fine, but not for me. And I would have said, that's what you guys want. We can just end the interview right now. I'm not taking this job. Unfortunately, I didn't find that out until my second week on the job. And so you really want to ask questions. Maybe one person you interview with asks you a bunch of questions, the next person you ask them a bunch of questions. If you're not getting a chance to ask questions, interrupt the person or start to kind of say, hey, we're running close on the schedule. I've got a couple of things I'd like to ask you. Could we do that? If you really can't get questions answered by the end of the interview, hopefully your last interview of the day is either with HR or with the manager. Say to them, look, people really grilled me about a lot of stuff. I don't have enough information about the company to know whether I think it's a good fit. Could we talk on the phone? Could we schedule another interview? Something. But make it clear to them that you don't have enough information right then and there. And if you don't ask any questions during an interview and you accept a job offer, frankly, I think you're crazy. And I don't mean questions of like, what kind of machine do we get and what's my salary? It's, I want to know things like, what don't you like about the company? What problems are you guys having that you're trying to solve that are frustrating you, and why haven't you solved them? What are my projects going to be? It's a two-way process, and it's up to you to make sure that you get a chance to ask questions as well as them asking you questions. Now, when I'm teaching my interview course, I tell people this, and I say, look, give them time to ask because you don't want them to quit after 3 months any more than they want to quit after 3 months. People are going to ask you a lot of questions. It's okay to say, I don't know. Now, if you say, I don't know to every question, obviously you're not going to get the job. But at a certain point, you're exploring email, you talk about this, talk about that. Eventually, you're going to say, so, how do you do this? Just say, I don't know. You can either say, I've never dealt with that part of it yet, or, I remember reading something about that, but I really don't understand it well. Would you like me to guess? Or you could say something that, I learned that a long time ago. I think it's changed since then. If they want you to guess, great. If not, hopefully they just move on. Whether they count it against you or not, who knows. But it's always better to say, I don't know. Or if you're not sure, to say, I think the answer is this. Maybe a little fuzzy on it. And They may challenge you, they may not. Hopefully they're not going to play tricky games like challenge you on a question that you've answered correctly. Trick questions in interviews don't serve anybody any purpose. If you're not sure, say you're not sure, tell them your best guess, and say, you know, I could be wrong, etc. Most people would rather that you say that, and they know what the limits of your knowledge are, and they know that you're willing to say, look, I don't know everything. Bullshitting your way through an interview is just a really bad idea. Just really bad idea. Quickly, because I know it's 3 o'clock, so I'm going to go through this fast. There are a couple of questions that you really hope they don't ask you. Questions about religion, politics, marital status, medical history, etc., etc., etc. If they ask you that, the best answer that you can give is, I'm sorry, I'm really not comfortable discussing that. If they persist in asking you about that, at that point, you sort of want to go to HR after that person's there. I mean, you just sort of keep saying, look, I don't want to talk about that. And you know, if they ask you just one question like that, maybe it's a cultural difference. In Europe, some of those questions are reported. And I've been interviewed by Europeans who think nothing of asking that question. And if they just say, oh, okay, move on, it's fine. If the person persists in asking those questions and pushes it, at that point it's reasonable to mention something to HR or to the manager about it, because they really shouldn't be asking those questions. A worse problem is this. I have no clue what it does. I know that it exists. I looked it up for the purpose of this slide. If somebody asks you a question like this in an interview, to a certain extent, you're doomed. Right? There's no good answer. The real answer is, why the hell are you asking me that question? You can't say that to them. The best thing that you can do is say something like, you know, that's not a flag I use all the time. That's not a command I use all the time. If I had to figure that out, I'd say man CPP and go look it up and find this. Or you might say something like, well, yeah, I use CPP a bunch and it does this, that, and the other. I've never had to use that option. It's a really bad question, but you don't want to tell them that. Right? You don't want to say, don't ask me stuff like that. If they keep pushing, if that's like all the questions they're asking, you've basically written off that person, they've written you off, and you hope for the best in that.
That's a good point to interrupt them and ask them your question.
If you can, yeah. At the end of the interview, thank the person for their time. If you forgot to get their card, try and get it. Whatever, the usual stuff. Shake hands, stand up, whatever is appropriate. At the end of the last interview, or sometime in the last interview, which again, hopefully is with HR or the manager, ask them what to expect next. Will you be making a hiring decision directly from this? You typically do a second interview. When should I expect to hear something? Who will do it? If I haven't heard something by such and such a date, who should I contact? Is there any additional information you need me to provide? Those kinds of things. If they paid for you to come out to the interview, make sure that you've got all the right forms for travel reimbursement. Make sure that all this stuff set up. If they're going to cover your hotel directly, make sure that they charged it there. All that usual good stuff. After the interview, send a thank you note. Hopefully you've got at least one email address. And if you didn't get names and email addresses of all the people, hopefully send it to the manager and say, please thank everyone there for taking the time to interview me, etc. Say thank you, etc. Even if you don't want the job, even if you know you don't want the job, send the thank you note. In the thank you note, you can say, I thought about it. I really don't think it's a good fit. I appreciate your time. I don't proceed or whatever it is. If you do want the job, say something like, look forward to hearing from you again, or I hope to meet you again soon, or whatever. Don't say, I really hope you'll give me the job. Said some other stuff. I just want to cover something about leaving your job, current job, briefly. No matter how much you hate your current job, be polite about leaving. Write the shortest possible resignation letter. I'm writing to inform you that as of such and such a date, I'll be terminating my position, I'll be ending my contract, whatever it is. You know, don't tell them where you're going, tell them why, don't tell them anything, simply say, you know, can we please meet to discuss the terms of my departure and, you know, turning over my key badge or whatever it is. No matter how much you hate the person, no matter how much you hate the job, just be polite about it. Partly, it's a very interconnected world. Everybody knows everybody else, and if you burn bridges, someone's going to hear about it, or worse, you're going to run into that person again in the future. I've had the same manager 3 times at 3 different companies. Now, as it happens, he and I are good friends, and either he hires me or I hire him, but you're going to run into these people again. Just be polite about it. It doesn't do anything other than maybe make you feel good to tell them how proud you are. Just be really polite about it. Last, do it in writing and do it at least 2 weeks in advance, or go to your boss and say, look, I want to leave, you know, can we negotiate a date? And work that out. Let me real quick get through these. And then talk to the manager, make sure the manager knows you're leaving and you've negotiated all the stuff, including who's going to tell the group you're leaving and when. Because sometimes there are sensitive issues there. Look, you're on your way out the door. You've got another, hopefully you've got another job. Just pretty much do whatever they say as long as it's reasonable. The easier and less hassle you have getting out of there, the better things are going to turn out to be. And unless you really can't stand the people you're working with, walk around and say goodbye to them. I mean, unless you, again, if you know, if you can't stand each other, you sort of know it, you still walk around and say goodbye. That's it. I know I breezed through some of that, but there's a lot of stuff here. Quick question.
Comment. Check your HR policy on the event. At least at Penn, if you give at least a month's notice, they pay you for any unused vacation. If it's
Interesting.
less than a month's notice, you don't get it.
That's fine.
And also, don't leave your current job until you have a new job in writing. I don't care how much promises.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
How much promises you have.
Yes, have the offer letter in hand if you're leaving for another job. I have occasionally just said, you know,
Yeah.
I can't take it anymore.
And the other thing is, some organizations, be aware, if you take a job in another sector, you're required to be walked out by policy.
Yeah, but they'll tell you that.
Well, I mean, as to your check the policy,
Yeah.
in our environment, if we go to another financial, we are required to surrender all our equipment badges on the spot, or walked out by policy within 1 hour.
Yeah, that may or may not be a policy that you can see. I'll take your question in a second. I know we're 10 minutes into the break. I'm happy to take questions while I'm breaking down so the next person can get in here. But for the people that do want to get out to the break, please feel free to leave.